I'll give you the broad outline. Firstly, as in fact, Priyank and I had a fantastic discussion on the way. Uh, a confession as to what is the spirit in which I've written this. By no means as an expert. No means. I shouldn't even use that word because it's such a loosely used word. It's done to death. Expertise has lost all its relevance and meaning. So, out of the three sections of the book, which is captured in the subtitle Coloniality, Civilization, and Constitution, the first two portions effectively are the lens through which I look at the third section. And the first two sections, I have relied heavily on scholarly literature, starting from Radha Kumar Mukherjee to Majumdar and everybody else. People who I want others to read and to try and bring them back into the mainstream historical discourse. So there, my position is that of a learner, a beginner, but someone who's committed and who's tried to internalize whatever is it that they have said. But by the time I move to the third section where I start speaking of political economy and the constitution, I have written it not as an expert, but as someone who knows something about the subject, thanks to both his training as well as the fact that he has participated in civilizational matters or constitutional matters of civilizational importance. So my training and first-hand experience come through in the third section. The idea, so I was told, why didn't you change the subtitle to Civilization, Coloniality, and the Constitution? There is a reason for it, because I'm effectively showing the civilization as being sandwiched between coloniality and constitution, as being stuck between a rock and a hard place. Okay, what is the rock and what is the hard place? I leave it to you without attracting any contempt of court. So the point is, uh, that is the broad layout. The connection between Columbus's expedition of 1492, which began what we know as the Age of Discovery, and its movement towards European colonialism, and its direct impact, documented impact, which is never discussed, on the origins of contemporary Indian constitutionalism, starting from the 1919 Government of India Act, which is effectively the first British made constitution for Bharat. So those aspects. So typically when we discuss constitution, we look at Constituent Assembly debates. Ambedkar said this, Munshi said that, this person said that. Take a look at these reports. That's where it ends. It at best goes from 1940s to 1950. I've taken it back to, in fact, the 15th century and connected all those aspects to values we celebrate as constitutional values, specifically the report that forms the basis of the Government of India Act of 1919. And I show what they have said. What is it that they had in mind when they were promulgating this enactment? What is their vision for India, not Bharat? What is it that they said? And this book, I can confidently say this. People can disagree with me on my conclusions. People can disagree with me on the positions that I've taken, but you will not be able to catch me on facts. You will not be able to controvert me on facts. That I'm very confident of, even if I say so myself. Because I've literally spent a lot of time pulling out the first-hand material. What first-hand material? British parliamentary debates. What was going on in their minds? Because you see, be it in criminal law or in human psychology, the most difficult thing to distill and discern and decipher is the human intent, the motive. You'll never be able to get it. You only have to judge it on the basis of actions. So I've tried to decipher what the intent is, and I've tried to say, this is the intent, the outcome is in front of you. Why do you now secularize the conduct? Okay. So I've tried to connect all of that. I expect a huge calumny campaign against me for whatever I've said from within and outside. But be that as it may, I'm 100% sure that the references speak for themselves, so that nobody can accuse me of confirmation bias, saying he's put the conclusion out and he's using the facts to somehow weave his way towards the conclusion. No. People can see the conclusion in front of their eyes. I'm merely saying this is the path that it is effectively, let's say, traversed or traveled. And this is the journey that this particular sacred legal document has effectively taken. Now you tell me, why should we think any different? Why should we have any different positions with respect to this particular document? So this is the first part of the Bharat trilogy, where the period ends at 1919-1920, where I connect the confluence of three important milestones: the end of the First World War, the founding of the League of Nations in 1920, the passing of the Government of India Act of 1919, all three being connected. This was not a national development, this was the consequence of an international development. That's the point that I make. The second book will cover the period between 1920 and 1951. 1951, because that's when the Constitution was amended for the first time. It's typically known only for the amendment with respect to land reforms, but the other thing that is typically ignored is that free speech was truncated by the founder of free speech, Sri Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, ably aided by the father of the Constitution, the then Law Minister, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. So that happened then. The third part, or the third sequel, the second sequel and the third part of the trilogy will therefore cover the period from 1952 until 1977, when Mrs. Gandhi actually inserted socialism and secularism, and then subsequently what happened there. So that's the tentative timeline. This is what the book covers. So I'm happy to announce that tentatively the launch will be just a few days before the 15th of August, and post which I hope to do quite a few book tours, simply because certain portions of the book will require book reading sessions. I'm going to do that to try and explain those aspects of the book which could appear to be dense. And I have extracted several portions of first-hand material as opposed to putting them in the appendix, because nobody reads the appendix typically. And I want people to see what is it that people said. And wherever possible, I'm simply saying, do I need to say any further? Why do I need to say any further? He said what I wanted to. So that's the effect of the last 3 chapters. So according to me, the punch of my book is in the last 4 chapters, where I start from the 31st of December 1600, when the London Company, which we know as the British East India Company, was founded through a charter given then. And then I move to 1853. Then 1858 onward, there is a point of inflection. So 1858 to 1919. So that is the last 4 chapters. The theoretical arguments and the conceptual arguments are given in the first section, where the paimana, so to speak, is global. So first section is global. The second section is Bharat specific. It's tryst with colonialism and coloniality specifically. And then as part of the tryst, if all of this has happened as part of the colonial experience, why do we assume that the Constitution is independent of and divorced from the colonial experience is the question that I ask in the third section. And then I support it with evidence. I've approached this like a lawyer who's proving his case. I'm not neutral. I don't claim neutrality, because the age of neutrality, if it ever existed, has long gone. So therefore, I have clearly taken a position with the intention, here's my position and here's the material. Blame the position, let's see what you do with the material. Next. So this was meant to be a single book covering everything. But by the time I was done with 60% of the book, and by the time the material was surfacing as we kept writing, I said it can't be a coincidence. I'm a believer in this, that perhaps there's no such thing as a coincidence. And I said, you have to do justice to the material. My research team, Ms. Shaktiki Sharma and Ms. Vanya Agarwal, they pulled out so much of material, because I kept telling them, I'm sure there must be something in this. And they kept digging. I said, I have a trilogy on hand, and therefore I have to do this. Now, as to why, I think I've said this before, the idea was to capture this at some point. So the book was waiting to happen at some stage. I was very clear about that. And I'm not trying to be wise in hindsight. I am clearly saying that this was the intention at some stage, because that's precisely the same trigger for which I made the transition from engineering to law. So the book was meant to come out at some stage. The let's say my personal journey from 2018, ever since I participated in a few cases, and the developments, the tectonic civilizational developments of 2019, and the nonsense that followed thereafter, the reactions, the so-called reactions, I said, it's time. The only thing is, I was never clear if I had the stamina, the discipline, and the erudition or the patience for a book. Not that I have now that I've written. I know one thing for a fact, I have the discipline. Whether it has depth and erudition, I leave it for the readers to decide and posterity to decide. So I had to test myself through a couple of pieces through the Sunday Guardian column, Daily Guardian column. And after about 18 to 19 pieces, I said, testing is done. I'm sure the audience has responded positively. Therefore, I said, now I'll start on the book. So I started the book, I think, on the 12th of October, and it ended on Sri Ram Navami, 21st of April. And after the several rounds of editing, constant editing, chopping, all that I've done, I had a fantastic editorial support from a very popular Twitter handle, Sai Priya, who is a doctor by training. So she's fantastic at editing. So she helped me make it more readable, because when a lawyer writes, he's in a fighting mode constantly. Okay, I proved this, hence proved. I proved this, hence proved. He's constantly doing this, and it gets repetitive after a point. So the only thing that's missing is an objection, my lord. So who are you going to object? You're talking to yourself. That'd be stupid. So, so, and the lawyer drafts. He doesn't write. There's a difference between drafting and writing. So drafting is chisel, chisel, chisel. People can't read that beyond a point. That's why most people hate lawyers. क्या लिखते हैं समझ में नहीं आता है. So the idea was to loosen that a bit, those rooms for, let's say, imagination a bit, and which is why I use the column effectively as a training ground to change my writing style a bit and moving into general areas, because lawyers are comfortable with specifics. Vagueness scares them a bit. And since I'm not trained in subjects which are relatively non-specific, such as civilization and coloniality, and having the miserable misfortune of being an autodidact in those subjects, I'm sure I must have made quite a few obvious mistakes. But I'm taking that chance nevertheless, because I think I've got the pulse of it, I've got the spirit of it, which will more or less convey to the audience what I've understood of it. And it serves as a fantastic lens for the actual focus of the attention, which is constitution. So to that extent, I've clearly said, on the first two sections, there is enough scholarly literature. I don't wish to pass off as a scholar. I've made the reference. I've told you what I'm using it for. Go read it. There are enough references. But whatever is it that I use that particular concept for the subsequent analysis, that job is done. So to that extent, I think it's okay. That's why the book, hence the book. And it'll be not just a trilogy. After this, I have quite a few things in mind, because now it is thrown up what I would call a decoloniality series. And hopefully I'll start covering different aspects of different regions of the country. Northeast being one of those aspects, specifically the how the tribal identity was created and whatnot. Yes.
Namaskaram, Deepakanna.
Yes.
I'm Ruchi, one of the learners of Rashram. As the world knows, you also a flag bearer of Safe Temple movements. I would like to know one thing about it. Unfortunately, still we follow HRNCE law in India, in our land Bharat.
Right.
So now government have said that they are willing to release temples, but they are forming boards.
Which government has said this?
No, for Uttarakhand, they
Have
have
they?
formed
Oh, okay.
Chardham Devasthanan board. And for other places, they said that we can create a board with eminent religious leaders. So it's like it's a indirect hijacking of things, isn't it? That ultimately the board will be handed over by the politicians as well as the bureaucrats only. So on the face, it might be released, but it's not. And second being, in our land, it's like there are mathadish, there are priests,
Correct.
and immense devotion and shraddha of the devotees which runs the temple. It's
Correct.
not a money making monument for us.
Correct.
So in that case, handing over it to eminent religious priest, will the devotees or the various sampradayas who have their own particular duties, rites, rituals, aren't we stepping over to their emotions, or for that matter, a better management is there only? What that Shraddha part is entirely gone in the temple aspects.
This question has the potential to open the floodgates, so I'll try and keep this very crisp. Okay. So one, I have to say this not out of any false sense of humility. I am not the flag bearer of any movement. No, under no circumstances. I don't wish to be either. Because one, it would do injustice to several people who have really sacrificed their lives before me, who have been doing this for several decades now. So I'm not. I am the proverbial squirrel who's contributing a pebble to this bridge, period. Second, I don't see myself under any circumstances in the activist mode, because then that will, let's say, sandarsh or paridrishya dono bigad jayega. You're supposed to, your lens must be very clear. And I'm a fan of clarity in whatever I say. Even if I'm wrong, I should be clearly wrong. At the very least, people should know where I'm wrong and how. I don't wish to, let's say, run circles around a particular proposition. So therefore, I'm in this as a practicing Hindu who's interested in protecting a certain way of life. And I use that much maligned phrase for a very clear reason. It'll come out in the book. Whether Hinduism is a way of life, I've addressed this legally also. So I'm using my limited skill sets on a pro bono basis like any other lawyer would do. Most people do that for NGOs who work for free speech and human rights. I'm doing this for Indic civilizational liberties. That's it. So it's a part of my pro bono commitments. So that caveat is very, very important, because you see, this could trigger unnecessary conversations about bacha bhi aa gaya, kya kar raha hai. No. I'm a bacha, I'll remain a bacha as far as this movement is concerned. I'm still a learner. I'm a learner. Okay. Let's come to the second question. I agree with the sentiment that you've expressed and the apprehension you've expressed. And that's precisely what is going on in our minds as well, saying what's happening. So, which is why any movement that comes with a political trigger will have the effect of politicization, when in fact it must merely be the last mile for implementation of a societal destination or goal. And that's why I'm very, very wary. It, of course, someone might say, no, no, that's not a political organization that has said this. It's a cultural organization that has said this, which has got nothing to do with politics. Which cultural organization has got to do with politics and not got to do with politics? We all know, right? So therefore, anybody who comments on this particular issue has effectively stepped into the realm of politics because it is rife with politics. Okay, so that's one. So that apprehension I completely endorse, and I'm happy that we are not the only ones who are thinking on these lines. The cynics who always have a problem with what somebody does. No, I think it's a legitimate apprehension. Thank you for endorsing it. Second, the problem with the position that you've just laid out is the much maligned creature called the Brahmin or the priest. Okay, since there is a significant degree of stereotyping that this particular group has gone through, and there is a direct equation which lands in people's head that priest is equal to Brahmin, which is not the case across the board. Okay, the public reaction in public discussions will be पंडित के हाथ से इसको निकालो किसी भी हालत में. But in private discussions that won't be the case, because the public energy is different. Something manic happens there. Okay, and then suddenly everybody starts saying this nonsense. Okay, now this is not something that you can accuse the usual suspects of alone. That is a rogue that all of us are equally afflicted with, significant degree. I mean, only the degrees will vary. So if that is the case, can you hope to raise this question before a political audience, or even for that matter a non-political larger audience, without being accused of a caste supremacist? The moment you start doing this, this is where the discussion goes. So therefore, I think that the Free Temple movement will effectively decide quite a few things, especially the course of public discourse on the issue of caste will also be one of the issues that will be discussed as part of this. Either you go with the nonsense that's been taught to you all these days, or you revisit it. And you don't use, and here's the cynicism and opportunism that comes here, you don't use a colonial version of history for a so-called Indic goal. The moment you do that, I'm sorry to say, you're no more worth trusting, whoever it may be, whichever dramatist person it may involve, whoever the stakeholder may be. After that, the bets are off. Next.
Namaste, sir. I'm Dhavan. So when you said your star started aligning after 2014, I must.
You're not my star, Samma, generally.
I must confess that I think now that my star started aligning after I started following you, and my question
I
was.
pity you. My sympathies are with you.
No, I'm glad to be. And my question is about the book. Is there any particular reason why you have stopped at 1977, the 1970s?
No, so that is the minimum time frame for the third book. But of course, there have been significant developments after that. See, a lot of it is a function of my time. Contrary to some kind of opinion, I'm not into this full time. I'm a professional litigator with a 17-hour schedule. Plus, I'm an insomniac, thanks to IIT preparation that every engineer goes through in this country. Okay, so therefore, my sleep patterns coupled with all of this effectively ensure that I have very limited time for everything else, notwithstanding what people perceive as my presence on Twitter. It's what, 280 characters, kya jata hai, kiska kya jata hai, okay, once in a day. And the number of tweets don't even match the number of time, or let's say the number of years I've spent on Twitter. Okay, so therefore, it's largely a function of my professional commitments. And the point is to not populate a book with too much information. Take a few topics, address it with clarity, because the constitution has so many developments connected to it that I can't do justice to it completely. Once the trilogy is ready, according to me, that's the master template on the basis of which spin-offs can come out. So I can perhaps stop the trilogy there effectively, but I can use that as the conceptual basis for subsequent works to effectively say, I've said this here, now let me connect what I've said here as the primary proposition with subsequent developments to see whether there's a continuity in this thought process or not. That can happen later. Therefore, at the very least, 1977. Beyond that, I will see depending on my schedule. Yeah, yeah. rein in whenever you wish to. Yeah. 2 more questions. Yeah. We'll end it with a lady. Courtesy Sabrimala.
Hi.
Yeah.
My name is Prasad. I heard you saying, you say ki, the civilization is being sandwiched between the colonization and the constitution.
Yes, please.
So apart from Rastram, what probable solutions you would like to suggest us through this book and all?
So I think there are quite a few options within the much reviled and rightly reviled RTE, Right to Education Act. There are exceptions which are carved out in that which nobody wants to look at. For Ved Pathshalas, there are exceptions. I'm sorry to say, but those are your roots. And I'm not sorry to say that. And Raghav and I have had these discussions extensively that it starts and ends with education and nothing else. Because
That's what I said. Apart from Rastram, what else probable solutions?
So the probable solution, if I could say so, is there are certain institutions, I don't wish to name them for confidentiality reasons, who would perhaps be willing to extend their facilities as, let's say, as projects for certain civilizational initiatives.
Yeah.
And I don't have the bandwidth for it. So on certain aspects, I can be a prime mover, which are closer to my area of expertise, or at least, if not expertise, core competence. And on certain aspects, I can move a few wheels and cogs in the chain and basically say, I can do this, I can introduce, I can do all of this. So wherever there is an initiative that I passionately believe in, and it's something that I would have done had I had the brains and the time and the resources for it, if I see a connect there, I support it to the best of my abilities. Like Rashtam, there are quite a few other initiatives. So in the long run, the selfish hope is that our children go to schools and we don't have to be worried about what they come out with. That's the only thing that I'm interested in. That's the only motive that I think I'm driven by at this point. When somebody says, I'll send them to another university which is closer to this particular place, I say, please. And my fear is that those options are increasing and we are on the decline. Those institutions that have existed have also started compromising on their values thanks to this nonsense called wokeism. So I therefore want to try and give them a run for their money as much as possible. I'm sure we won't go down, but if that is what is written, we are not going down without a fight under any circumstances. So therefore, the idea is to pummel, punch, and drive this point as hard as possible because that's the only language the other side understands. And that's the only language I'm happy to speak in. So therefore, the idea is to increase these options so that you're not in the minority and you are the mainstream. That the products of Rashtam are never outnumbered. And that there are more such institutions. And that more people, because you see, the Hindu society has suffered from monopolization of its outcomes or its goals. That should never happen. And I say so with no disrespect to the founders here. We are at such a place that a monopoly doesn't help. Here, the free market has to rule, and effectively, we need more options, as many options as possible, preferably starting with the right intentions and continuing on the same path. Right? That's the answer. I know I've not been specific, but that's for a very good reason. I don't wish to name. I can only say initiatives such as these are on the way, and people like me will support them to the hilt in every manner possible, openly and publicly. Yes. Correct. People should know that it's a feasible model. That's it. So I'm not a trustee of the Indic Collective. I'm not a member of the Indic Collective. I'm merely their mentor. It's a part of my pro bono commitment. It's not something that I do full time because there are better people to do it. When this organization was being thought of and conceived of, everyone was on the same page. It should inspire people and tell them it is ideologically feasible, it is logistically feasible, it is legally feasible, and certainly financially feasible. The moment you show that, any number of organizations come, because you see, you can't be everywhere. The kind of problems that you're faced with and the challenges you're faced with, You must have, I mean, you must be a downright arrogant, insufferable person to think that you can do it all alone. Impossible. 100% impossible. You'll tire yourself out. You'll have no life of your own after that. I don't want to die a bitter man saying, oh, we should have done this, we could have done that. I have zero intentions of doing that. In a war, the only option is victory. In a battle, the only option and the only vikalp that you are entitled to choose for is victory. That's it. You come out winning. And here you have no other option because you are perhaps the last standing stronghold of a non-Western civilization, a pre-colonial indigenous civilization, and the mothership of indigeneity, according to me. So, therefore, I want as many people as possible to quote Naipaul, 1,000,000 mutinies. That's what we are looking for. That lady's been waiting for some time. Yes.
So my question is, like, I come from design and stories background, from fashion background.
Right.
And politics and talking on the topics of politics require new lot of jargons, new lot of terminologies that makes us understand the world of leadership from the political angle.
Right.
So what are your suggestions for people like who are coming from the different background, from backgrounds of fashion, design and other aspects, to go into the mainstream of political leadership and understand and talk in that terms?
Right.
What are your suggestions on that?
It's a good thing that you don't come from that particular fraternity for a different reason. I'll say this based on my experience of writing the book. I'm not bragging about the book. I don't think that I need to. The point is, when you take up a new subject where the terminology is bound to bog you down in the initial days of reading, you will have this burning desire. Could they have not said this in a simpler fashion? What is this need to use words like recursive at every possible juncture? What are you trying to say? Make it clear. But then see, that's the lay person talking. They are trying to first cater to their home audience, which is the academic fraternity. So you can't blame them. If, as a lawyer, my first goal is to win respect of my peers. Everybody else comes later. Right? So that's the language they will write in. So you have the fantastic opportunity of doing what? Learn, simplify, disseminate. The first two sections of my book do exactly the same thing, where I've tried to digest material which has been as hard as pig iron, and I've tried to say I'll present it in a edible fashion to the people who must know what is going on in the academic fraternity, because that's where the battle is being fought. Because that's where textbooks are being written. That's where the policy is being formulated. That's where the pedagogy is being, let's say, created, so to speak. So understand that and present it. So your journey should be learn, don't evade that process. It will be difficult, but I'm sure in this place there won't be a dearth of any kind of support. Either, let's say, with reference to subscription-based databases or people who you can reach out to. So do that, and then bring in your core competence and your fundamental skills to see how you can actually disseminate. If you're from design, I'm dying to read a new version of Amar Chitrakatha which retains the spirit of the past and doesn't have the stupidity of removing the Janevu from the Saptarishis. That's what they've been doing now. They're removing it. I'm sorry, what history are you trying to... If this is your case, will you give up the atrocity literature that you peddle with respect to caste the moment you remove that? You're not going to do that. So you'll use that as a stick to beat with, and you'll continue to deracinate us completely. You'll continue to pixelate this past entirely. So I'm happy that people from the design side are actually coming in. The creative, let's say, people must be a part of this, because I don't want to use that word soft power anymore. I'm saying it's a very clear hard power. It's a hard component. It is intangible, perhaps that's why it is soft, but its reach is tremendous and phenomenal. A 30-second video can do much more than what a book these days can do. I think it's unfortunate. That's a reflection of the times that we live in and the attention span that we suffer from. Okay, not blessed with, suffer from. Therefore, this is something that you can certainly do. Read, understand, and find ways of simplifying and disseminating. Because today the problem is that all this discussion is stuck in academic ivory towers. It needs to go out. It needs to go out. The ideation cannot be democratic, but consumption can certainly be democratic. Because not everybody can contribute to a particular subject, and I don't think everybody is capable of. I dare say this. Somebody starts talking to me on constitutional reforms, my first question will be, what do you know about the subject? How are you qualified to speak on this? It's not a question of authority, it's a question of qualification and training. That would be my first question. So similarly, this is the journey I think that you could perhaps consider adopting. And I'd be interested to see what kind of creative civilizational initiatives come out of this place. Not just hardcore academic aspects. That'll be fantastic. Animation, whatnot. the kind of itihasas and puranas we have, I'm surprised it's such a poorly tapped resource for animation. What kind of stupid superhero for sci-fi movies do we consume? They're really nothing. I honestly, in terms of sheer imagination, the sheer possibility, and obviously you can't be doing that using real life characters. Therefore, you have to go for CGI and whatnot. What a fantastic industry that is. A Kung Fu Panda can do so much for the soft image of China, a repressive regime, a bloody regime. We can't do better for Bharat with the kind of itihasas we are blessed with, not cursed with. So therefore, I think it's great that people with your backgrounds have come. That gives me a lot of hope. Clearly, there is a diversity in your intake. Fantastic. All the best.